my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, from the words of my groaning?
O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Have you ever cried out like that before? I know that I have. As I was preparing for this morning, as I was reflecting, thought back through my life and some of these stories I've shared with you all before. But I remember kind of the first time I remember it when I was a kid and I moved schools, 10, 11 years old, into a new space, new group of people, none that I knew, felt lonely. And in that moment, I wondered, God, where are you? And then most of us can probably remember growing up, asking somebody out for the first time. Maybe the rejection that you felt in that moment. Or your first breakup. How you thought that the world was coming crashing down. Now we, as adults on the other side, look back and we kind of know that, that's not the end of the world, but remember what that felt like as a kid, right? We should remember that for our kids. The reality of those feelings. In fact, I think we still have them as adults as we grow. I remember several years ago, my mum and dad split up. And as I looked at them and saw the pain that they were going through, and I wondered, God, where are you in this place? Sometimes our cries are in silence. Sarah and I, we got married right after I graduated college. My roommate got married at the same time. He stayed in England, I moved here. Shortly after his marriage, his wife was killed in a drunk driving accident. He came over to stay with us. We're young 20-somethings. We didn't know what to do. We spent hours walking on the trail in silence, crying out. Sometimes our cries are songs. Maybe even one of the songs we sang this morning. For me, there's a song, we sing it together called Do It Again. It starts with these words. Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, waiting for change to come. That song reminds me of a period in my life where I was waiting for some change and was not see it coming. And I wondered, God, where are you? We cry out with our families. Any family that's experienced a move, you know what that's like in a new place. Losing a loved one together. Asking those questions. We cry out with and for our friends. Shared before the story of my friend Clayton and his little girl who has a little genetic disorder. How they didn't know what life would hold. And they cried. I think of friends who have been treated as less than human because of their race or their sexual orientation. And they wonder in that space, God, where are you? We do this together as a church. You do this with each other. Those of us on the pastoral team get to experience that as well with you guys through the weeks. The pain of illness, wrestling through broken relationships, abuse, unmet expectations, miscarriage, the death of a child or of a parent, suicide. My God, why have you forsaken me? If you've been around church for a little while, you may recognize those words. If you haven't, that's okay. We're going to talk about them this morning. They were words that Jesus spoke from the cross. In Matthew chapter 27 and verse 46, we read, about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus there isn't kind of ad-libbing on the cross. Jesus is speaking words that come from the book of Psalms. From Psalm chapter 22. Psalms is kind of the songbook of the people of God. And in Psalms, there's a lot of different types of Psalms, but generally 2 categories. Psalms of praise and Psalms of what is called lament. Lament, it's not a word we use often. Lament, we're going to say lament is bringing our sorrow to God. Just a quick story for you all. So I've spoken about this before. If you've kind of been a part of the church, I spoke on this for a first time a couple of years ago. I thought it went quite well. It was one of those, sometimes when you speak, you're like, oh, I felt a connection there. And I did. I felt like that one went well. And then, I don't think he's here this morning, but then my friend Matthew, some of you guys will know Matthew. I've got a friend, Matthew. Matthew is an encourager and he's a truth teller at the same time, which is great. He comes up to me after the service. He gives me a big hug. He's like, Steve, that was great. That was so great. I loved it, Steve. I loved it. That was so great. I've just got one question for you. What is lament? And I was like, oh my gosh. So to help us out this morning, lament, bringing our sorrow to God. And lament is so much more than just feeling sad. It's so much more than just crying. In summing it up, Mark Vrogop, in his book, Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, says it this way. He says, to cry is human, but to lament is Christian. We all cry. How do we know that a baby is born? I mean, if it's not crying, they kind of slap that thing so it does cry. That's normal. And it's healthy for us to progress through life where we cry. But yet lament is more than that. It's not less than, but it is definitely more. Lament is almost like a dance. It involves movements. It's not linear, but there's a first step every time, and that first step is a step of turning to God. Lament is Christian. We turn to God. And then within that movement, we can read, we can study, and we're going to do this over the next few weeks. And we see that there are movements of, there's a complaint. Something is wrong. We feel it. And then there's an ask. We ask God, would you do something about this? Change this. God, why? How long? And then, as this stuff kind of wiggles around and moves, and there is a trusting. There is a choosing to trust God, because lament is Christian. If we continue reading in Psalm 22 that was there in our bumper that Jesus spoke on the cross, we read this. It starts, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. They were not put to shame. This is all lament. We need all the moves in our lives. We need all the steps of this dance to embrace the fullness of it. Sometimes our stories and our circumstances can limit us. We know some moves well and others not so well. And it's different for different ones of us. This is what we want to explore together over the coming weeks. As I was getting ready, my friend Douglas, you'll meet him in a little while, Douglas asked me a question. He's like, Steve, why does this matter so much to you? He's kind of like, you're sort of a hopeful guy. You generally seem kind of pretty positive. Why lament? And as I thought about that question, I thought about all those circumstances earlier. And I thought about how in those circumstances, sometimes I didn't know how to lean into that hope. I didn't know how to hold the sorrow and yet trust God at the same time. I didn't want to pretend that the pain that was in front of me in my own life, in the life of somebody else, wasn't real and rush away. But yet I knew that staying there was a pit of deep despair. And that when we trust God, something is different. And I think as I discovered what it was to lament, I found that hope that I had deepened within me. Cole Arthur Riley, in her book, This Here Flesh, talks about it. She says it succinctly like this. She says, our hope can be only as deep as our lament is. And just as importantly, our lament as deep as our hope. This is how we are grounded. It's been so interesting as I've been reading over these past few weeks about lament. One of the words that keeps coming up is lament orients us. Think about where we've been these past 3 weeks. As we started this year, we've been talking about orienting for the journey. Lament is a gift of grace to us as we take this journey together. It's a gift that we see all throughout Scripture when we open our eyes to it. Through the Old Testament, in the lives of Job, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Ezra, lament is there. One of the stories that, most of us may know, it's one of the first kind of Old Testament Bible stories we teach our kids of Jonah. Jonah, a little prophet who God called Jonah to bring a message, and Jonah's the one that got swallowed by the whale, the big fish. And Jonah's in that belly of the whale, and what does Jonah do? Jonah laments. It's not just in our Old Testament. It's in the New as well. Jesus on the cross as we started. But yet actually as you read through the life of Jesus as he speaks, he quotes these lament psalms as he goes through. It's part of his language, his vocabulary. Paul, who writes many of the letters in the New Testament, does the same thing. Quotes these psalms. Paul himself gives his own lament. Paul talks about he has some affliction. He calls it the thorn in his flesh. Some of us probably know what that's like. There's something that just right there, and it just keeps coming and coming and coming. And Paul says his lament, he cried out to God, take it away, God. We read through all the way, even to the very end of our Bibles in Revelation. Revelation that paints this picture of things that are coming and happening. And in that moment, in chapter 6, we read about martyrs around the throne of God, people who have given their lives for their faith, who have died for their faith. And they cry out in that moment, how long, O Lord? They lament. See, lament was a known language for the community of God. The Psalms, as it were, one of kind of our biggest leaders in that, this was like the soundtrack of the lives of the people of God. When they were going on a road trip, this was their mixtape, for those that know what mixtapes are. Playlist, for those who are a little more modern. No? Of all kinds. You're going to the temple to celebrate. You put on your celebration psalm. It's somebody's birthday, it's a wedding, it's this, it's that, it's whatever. These are the psalms that came into those spaces. You encountered pain and suffering, confusion, loneliness, loss, anger. There was a psalm. Songs that fit moments songs that fit emotions. There's a group of us that meet as a teaching team to kind of help prepare our messages. We met earlier this week and we got to explore this idea together of songs that connect with life. And we started with kind of that basic stuff, the birthdays and holidays, Christmas carols, songs that came up at weddings and funerals, the variety of things that happen at sporting events. I just heard on the radio the other day, you guys know a couple of the performers at the Super Bowl. We know halftime is Usher. Apparently opening us up is both Reba McEntire and Post Malone. I mean, that's, we're kind of spanning the breadth right there. We laughed with each other. I won't embarrass anybody else. I shared my breakup song, the song that I remember from those teenage years. Some of you will know it. It Must Have Been Love by Roxette. Must have been love, but it's over now. I can still hear it playing in my head. From the moment we touched till the time around now. I won't try and sing, I won't go on. Maybe there's a different one for you. We know for the younger ones around us, Taylor Swift's got that market cornered right now. She's got all of those. We laughed together. We learned together. We learned about songs from Chinese culture, from Korean culture. Yolanda shared with us of growing up in the black church. We're going to have a baptism second service. For that would have been wade into the water. Going up yonder at a funeral. Nobody knows the trouble I sing. We learned of the spirituals sung by slaves as they lived under the injustice of being treated less than human. We then started sharing. We shared stories from our lives. Stories of a song that was sung as a loved one passed away. What that meant in that space. We lamented together. We lamented the ordinary griefs of life, of missing the familiarity of a memory growing up or of home. And we also mourned death. We mourned death of those we know and the power of sin and death that we still see in the world around us. And sometimes we did both at the same time. Jean-Claude shared the story. If you don't know Pastor Jean-Claude, he leads in the church and in our third service. And he told a story of when he was fleeing the genocide in Rwanda and the song that he would sing. And we imagined that space. The pain, the uncertainty, not knowing where family was or friends. And then Jean-Claude would tell the story, and he sang the song, actually sang the song for us, it was beautiful. And then he told us about how he would sing it when they were hiding. And his friends would be, shh, Jean-Claude, shh, we're meant to be hiding. This is lament, all together. My God, why have you forsaken me? When Jesus uttered those words from the cross, he was speaking that whole psalm, showing us our need for the fullness of lament to navigate life. See, Jesus knew his scriptures. He's Jesus. He knew Deuteronomy 31, verse 8, where the Lord said to his people, I will never leave you nor forsake you. But that's not what he said. He knew where the psalm was going. He knew where it turned to where the people will be rescued. But that's not where he started. He followed a tradition, actually, where in saying that first words, that first line, he gave value to everything within that psalm. The fullness of lament. Lament, which is a language for loss, a solution for silence, a category for complaints, framework for feelings, a process for our pain, and a way to worship. There's a fullness there. There's a wholeness, a completeness. This is what Jesus points us towards. When we think of the Sermon on the Mount as we walk through that series together, what did it point us towards? You think about some of the things there, the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn. Jesus pointing us towards a wholeness and a fullness in our lives. This idea of shalom, of peace, but not just peace, a completeness. Soon Chung Ra, in his book, Prophetic Lament, actually says that shalom requires lament. So, we want to be shaped. We want to be shaped to be like Jesus. And to help us alongside Psalms and these other stories, there's a book in the Old Testament, fairly helpfully called Lamentations. Lamentations, we may not be familiar with it. It's actually kind of a group of poems, okay? Whenever I hear about it, I'm like, oh, that's going to be difficult. But we actually know a little bit about it already. If you've kind of walked through with us, if you were with us last summer, Michael led us through the Nehemiah series, The Good Work. If you remember that series, that's Nehemiah coming to Jerusalem and rebuilding the wall. Well, Lamentations is kind of the prequel to Nehemiah. You know, you kind of wind yourself back 70 years, and that's when that wall was destroyed. 586 BC, the Babylonian Empire going throughout the earth with pretty much a scorched earth policy. They destroyed the temple, destroyed the wall around Jerusalem. Everything was lost. All hope was gone. It's at that moment that Jeremiah, most likely prophet Jeremiah, writes this book. And we're going to look at it through the next few weeks, but I want to kind of frame us with a couple of ideas just to start us this week, to prepare us for what's in there. Lamentations opens up like this in chapter 1, verse 1. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She who was great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. That opening word that actually gets repeated throughout there, that how, some of your translations may have it as alas. It's a Hebrew word, ekah. It's a whole sentence collapsed into one word. It reflects an emotional reaction. It's uttered when tragedy threatens to overcome speech. When snot-filled sobs interfere with words. That's Lamentations. Many of us know that space. But yet, there's another word that's important. Now, it takes a while to get there. And actually, that's important that it does take us a while to get there. We'll walk through that together. But in Lamentations 3, verses 21 to 23, we read this. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. So we have ekah, this how, this alas. But yet also we have this word there for steadfast love that's translated as steadfast love. The word is hesed. Steadfast or loyal love. It's another one of those words that's kind of got so much collapsed into it. It combines the ideas of love, of generosity, of enduring commitment. An act of promise-keeping loyalty that is motivated by deep personal care. This is what we get to hold together. The sorrow, the snot-filled cries, and the trust, the deep, trust, held with a God who is committed to his purposes and his plans. This is what we're going to do together, both personally and corporately, over these next few weeks. We're going to look each week. Michael and I are going to teach through Lamentations. There's 5 chapters, so we'll do a chapter a week where we teach through one of those chapters and look at what God is teaching us. And then we're going to walk through kind of some kind of practical stuff together as a team. So if Kim and Aaron and Douglas, if you guys would like to come up, that would be great. Oh, good. Douglas, you're over there. I hadn't seen you. So each week, Michael and I will teach, and then these guys are going to help lead us through kind of a really practical exercise. So I wanted to, just this morning, I'm just going to introduce them to you so you kind of know them and what's going on. If you guys want to grab a seat, that would be amazing. Welcome. Good morning. Yeah, okay. So this is Douglas. You guys probably know you've met Kim. That's Aaron on the end there. And so this morning, I've just got one question. So we're looking at this. We're viewing this as a journey that we get to take together. We're not in a hurry. We're not in a rush. We're going to take 5 weeks. And so we're not going to try and pack everything in this morning. But this morning, as we invite ourselves to the first step, I asked these guys this one question. What is one thing that you would want to give to someone who is beginning this journey? So we've been exploring this together for a few weeks, and so I wanted to kind of bring a little bit of that into your life. So Douglas, why don't you kick us off?
So what I would want to give, I'll kind of preface with how I came to that. When Steve mentioned to me a few weeks ago, hey, we're putting together a small team to help with a message series, some spiritual formation things. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And he said, and we're going to be doing the book of Lamentation. And I thought, oh, that's not as interesting. And because my personality, I'm generally a positive sort of person. I have in my life sorrows and griefs, just like all of you do. And I like to move past those and get on with my life. And so the thing, the next few days as I thought about this, I realized when I got the email about a family in our church that had lost an infant. And suddenly, lamentation, I don't have children, I don't know what that would be like, but I can only imagine how wrenching that would be. And in that space, I found myself able to enter into lamentation, at least for someone else. And over the few days, it's interesting how the Lord works, on us and in us. I sensed his gentle invitation into what are some things that, you might want to bring to me. What sorrows have you kind of pushed aside that I would really like to touch and heal and be with you and love you in. And so the thing that I would like to give is maybe you can identify if you're someone like me who wants to just sort of push things aside and move on with life. And there comes a point when that's necessary, but when we do that too quickly, we often miss what God would want to do in our relationship with him and his friendship toward us.
Thanks. Yeah, Aaron.
So I'm kind of the opposite of Douglas. We've had some good conversations over the last month about that, but my response was the opposite. Just talking about lament, and I'm like, oh, we're going to feel bad? It's great. I don't know why. So thinking about what this kind of means to me, it's really about participation in the Spirit, or with the Spirit, and what he's doing. One of my favorite things I picked up from George MacDonald's sermons is this idea that when Jesus, says, "Take my yoke upon you," I think everybody knows what a yoke is, right? It's the thing we put on an animal, helps them pull something heavy. So he's saying, "Take my yoke upon you," but what he's not saying that I have this yoke and I'm going to put it on you and I want you to carry this. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, this is my yoke and I'm in this thing, and I carry this thing. But it's one that has two. Sometimes there's two things in the yoke. And he's saying, there's a spot here for you to come alongside me and to pull this thing with me. But it remains his. It's his to carry, his weight and his burden. It never becomes ours. So thinking about lament, and a couple of verses I think of is Isaiah, 64:4, where God says, even to your old age I am he, and even to your gray hairs I will carry you. That I have made and I will bear. And so I think this is kind of God's attitude towards the whole world, that I've made this and I bear the weight of this. And I carry all of the pain and all of the sorrow. And that's not something he puts on us to carry. I can't even carry my own a lot of times. But he invites us to enter in with his spirit, which is moving and is grieving over the pain and hurt in the world. And we can enter into that with him and really participate in that. And this is part of the mystery of the gospel, that it's through this death that we find life and that we find these healing connections with other people. And that's what this really is for me.
Thanks. Kim, how about you?
Well, they just said a lot of good stuff. So
Yeah, we didn't talk about who was saying what, so sorry.
yeah, no, it's good. I think the invitation that I would say Jesus is inviting us all into is that he cares about the things that we carry, the things that we've lost, the things that we're grieving, our regrets even. There's a piece of in lament of regret sometimes, but I think knowing that God is for you, that lament isn't that you're not trusting God. And so if you're in a place where you've been carrying something maybe for a long time, the invitation that you can trust God with that space, that you can trust that he's kind and good and that he cares. And so like in my own life, this was quite a few years ago, there were a series of really significant losses that just felt so wrong. And lament became a safe place for me to hope in the midst of great, great sorrow. And then in the last couple years, in the last year and a half, I've lost both of my parents, and having a place to go with my sorrow and has been such a comfort to me. And then the other piece, I would say, just saying yes to this invitation to be curious and what lament could look like in your life is kind of what Douglas said, entering into a place where you are alongside whether an individual or a group of people. If you just look at the news, even some of our church family friends, some of their countries are under incredible pain and war, and being able to lament with them over the loss. And so it's a place to kind of show, it's a place to show solidarity, that I'm with you in this, and I will cry out with you for God's mercy. And so two things, Jesus cares about you. You don't have to dismiss your sorrow. And then it's an invitation to join him, like Aaron was saying. I tend to carry all the things. Like, if you feel sad, I'm sad. If you're rejoicing, I'm rejoicing. If I'm watching the news, I'm weeping over whatever I'm seeing. So that's a place for me to go, but it's a place I've grown in. It's not because I know that Jesus cares. And so he cares for you, and he cares for the injustices that are in the world. And so naming those things is good. And so those two places, yeah.
Thank you, guys. I hope that in hearing their stories, that maybe there's a place where you connect. You know, one of the things that was really helpful to us early on was actually listening to Douglas and Erin and go like, I'm the exact opposite of that, you know. And I think that's what happens. We bring our different stories here. And so, thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. So as we look to close this morning, we really do just want to extend an invitation to us as a church together to take a step into this, to take a step, whatever that might look like for you. I know as I've shared this kind of message series that's coming up, I've got a variety of different responses. Some positive, some not so positive. You know, we're going to navel gaze for 6 weeks, you know, that sort of thing. You know, that's not actually what we're looking to do. There have been some curious responses as well. Is there something wrong if I don't lament? Is there something wrong with me? You know, no, we're not trying to force anybody into anything, but we are looking to invite us as a church into a journey. Psalm 22, and actually all the lament psalms, very interestingly root themselves in something. They root themselves in the Exodus story of the release and the freedom of God's people. As we are now on the other side of the cross, our lament is to be rooted in the cross of Jesus. The cross where Jesus lamented and he was not forsaken, where he saved us. So the invitation this morning, so if you guys would like to stand. The invitation this morning is that we have time as a church. So maybe this morning, there's something in you where you go, oh, there's a part in my life where maybe the Holy Spirit has touched me this morning. And I want to just hold that. Whether it be a resistance, whether it be a place of pain, whether it be just a place of curiosity and of wondering. One of the really great things about kind of doing this together, the four of us, has been that we've got to explore this together. And I said, if I could bottle that up and give that to you, to where you maybe find a few people that you could explore this together with, then I think that will mean an awful lot for our church.